Hi everyone and welcome back to Matt's Dead Ukulele for a very special lesson today. In today's lesson we're going to have a look at how to learn and specifically how to practice. This is such an important component in your learning that I'm actually going to place this video amongst all of the courses that I do online. If you've already watched this video in one of the other courses, absolutely fine. Feel free to fast forward and go on to the next lesson. But I recommend that everyone watches this at least once. What I'm going to do first of all is give you some key but basic tips to help you with your learning and practicing. And then I'm going to teach you how to add some structure into your practicing. And this is really important. I'm going to show you how you can structure your practices and learning through the week, but also within those individual practices as well. Then at the end, I give you some of my final thoughts on practicing. Everything that we cover today is available in these worksheets which you can download along with the lesson. These are particularly useful when it comes to the structured learning part. Just before we go on to those basic tips, I just wanted to say this is one of the few videos where I'm not going to give you any shortcuts or cheats in terms of practicing. And that's because practicing is so important in your learning. But of course, it's rewarding and fun if you do it correctly anyway. And I'm finally old enough, you can see the grey hairs in my beard, to say that I've taught literally thousands of students. And the difference between those that practice regularly and those that don't is really stark. So see if you can get your practicing in, work hard, and your learning will accelerate massively. So let's start with a few of my basic tips for learning. First of all, try really hard not to be a musical magpie. What do I mean by that? Well, the temptation is when you're learning any new thing is to try and learn everything at once. You want to learn loads of repertoire, lots of different types of songs. You want to learn lots of different skills. But the trouble is what you can do is you can spread yourself too thin. And adding structure and sequential progression into your learning is really key. This is something I talk to my one-to-one students about all the time. And I speak from experience because when I started to learn, I did exactly that musical magpie thing where I took little bits of learning here and there. And it didn't really work because I wasn't able to concentrate on any one thing. So don't be a musical magpie. Try and concentrate on one key skill and one piece of repertoire at a time. Leading on from that nicely, I really want you to think sequentially about your learning. Think of it as a graph with an upward curve, and it's really important that we take one step at a time in a particular order. So if you're learning from a book, don't be tempted to skip to the back chapters. Go from the start because that tutor has spent many years preparing that book or course in a perfect manner. So for instance, you wouldn't want to do movable chord shapes before you understand how to do bar chords. And the reason we start with very basic strumming is that getting your strumming and your timing in is really crucial in your learning. So you don't want to run before you can walk. So think sequentially, it's really important. In terms of my own courses, I think it's really useful to take those 3 sequential courses one at a time, beginner's ukulele, then intermediate, and then next steps, because those have been designed in a very specific way to help you get on the ramp with your learning and then accelerate quickly. And then after you've done that, you can take part in all of those fun other courses such as fingerstyle, jazz and blues, and playing up the dusty end. And even within those courses, and you'll find this with most other tutors as well, I've planned the lessons to follow sequentially one after another. So they're in the specific order they're in to help you learn one step at a time, and that will really accelerate your learning. So again, try not to jump in at a particular point in the course. If you can, take them one step at a time, one lesson at a time, and one course at a time. Next up is an absolutely crucial one, and we're all guilty of this in life, I'm sure, but take your time with the lessons and particular skills. It's really important. If you learn properly and slowly, you'll learn much better, and at the end of everything, you'll be a much better player. For my own lessons, I really like people to work on them for at least 2 weeks because it's really important to absorb all the information, understand it, and then put it into practice. The temptation is to tick off a piece of music, and technically you might have played the notes right, but are you playing it well? you absorbed all those key skills, really think about playing a piece of music. Not just playing it, but playing it well. And that will make you a better player, but also you'll have way, way, way more fun as well. Next up, and something I encourage all my students to do, is to record your progress. Now, you can do this manually in a notebook, but what I really recommend is record a video of yourself at least once a month with your playing. Or, if you prefer, you could do it every lesson. Now, this is a key thing to do for a couple of reasons. First of all, when you record yourself, you will see your progress over the days, weeks, months and years. And that's really key in terms of keeping your enthusiasm up for your learning. When you look back at those first few videos, and they might be a bit cringy and you think, oh my goodness, it's actually really satisfying because you can see how your own learning is improving and your playing is getting better and better all the time. And that's a really great tool for encouragement. The other reason why recording yourself is so great is you'll notice little things that need correcting in your playing. And that's really great. Don't think of them as a negative thing. Think of them as a real positive thing. And you might not have noticed them otherwise. Sometimes even myself, even after I've been playing and teaching all these years, I'll notice something like my thumb will be creeping up over the top of the fretboard, whereas I want to keep it on the back of the neck. And I have noticed in a few videos sometimes that's happened. So then I thought, okay, that's something that I need to be conscious of and correct. Get that thumb on the back of the ukulele. So it's really, really useful for noticing those little things you might be doing. And of course, you don't need amazing technology to make these recordings. Even just a little video on your smartphone is fantastic. If you can keep them organised in folders in terms of dates, it makes it really great for tracking your progress. And don't forget, if you're one of my members, you can send me video submissions, which is really great because not only do you have your progress recorded, but I can also help you with your learning in terms of making suggestions as well. So if you are a member, make sure to take advantage of that. The next one is a really lovely thing to do, and you almost have to give yourself permission for this. Make your learning accessible. Have your ukulele as handy as possible. Now, if you've got a super nice ukulele which is humidity sensitive, I know you might need to keep it in its case. But if you have that case near to where you sit to learn, that's really great. If you do have a ukulele which you can have out on the wall and you can just grab or have next to your music stand, that's absolutely fantastic. Likewise, if you can afford the space, try and have a music stand or a table ready with your music printed out or downloaded onto a tablet and ready to go. Again, if your sheet music or your tablet is locked away in a cupboard somewhere and you've got to go through all the rigmarole of getting it out, it's another excuse, isn't it, not to sit down and learn. And we want to make learning a really joyful and happy experience. So have everything ready to go so you can sit down, you can settle down and you're ready to start your practice right away. And if you can, try and build a routine around that learning. If you can put aside a specific time once a day to practice, that's absolutely fantastic. If you can't make once a day, and not everyone can, that's totally fine. Perhaps twice a week would be really good. But having a set time, a set place where you can sit down with no distractions and really enjoy your practice is key to your learning. We all lead busy lives, and of course not everyone can spare that time, but I recommend every other day if you can, perhaps every other evening, put aside an hour where you can sit down with your ukulele and really enjoy some great learning. Another important thing to do is to make lots of notes, whether that be with a good old-fashioned pencil or with an iPad stylus. It's really important because quite often you'll be practicing away and you'll think about a question and you'll think, I must deal with that or ask someone about that later on. And you don't make the note and then you get to the end of your practice session and it's gone. This is particularly important if you're having one-to-one lessons. Often students will start the lesson with me and I'll ask if they had any questions with their learning and they'll sit there thinking, yes, there was something, but I can't remember what it was. So any questions, write them down even in the middle of your practice and you can come back to it. And of course, if you're one of my members, you can use the Ask Matt function to send me messages with your questions, with your learning as well. So write them down when they occur to you rather than at the end of your practice session. And likewise, these are really handy anyway, because you might want to make notes with your fingering on your charts. You might want to draw a chord diagram. Really, really important. So write all over your manuscript paper. Another cool thing to have is to have some blank tab. So if you're doing some fingerstyle pieces, for instance, you might have some ideas for changing the music. So that can be really useful as well. Or likewise, a playing exercise book that you just have out with your sheet music. Really great resource to have. I actually think this next one might be the most important of all. Don't be discouraged by your mistakes. Learning any instrument is hard. You're making an inanimate object sing. How amazing is that? It's a really tricky and difficult thing to do, and it takes time and patience. Now, if you're seeing lots of mistakes, the automatic thing to think is, oh, I'm not doing very well, I'm rubbish at this. But the very fact that you're hearing and seeing those mistakes and those little problems, the squeaks and buzzes, the fact that you're hearing them means that you realise there's a problem. And that's a really positive thing, because there's always steps to address that. And that's my job as your teacher, or if you have another one, that's their job as well. So don't sweat the mistakes. It's really good that you're spotting them. Now, if you've done any of my lessons before, you've probably heard me banging on about this next one all the time because it's so important. And that's to slow down the tempo when you're learning. If you can play something slowly, you can play it fast with practice. But to learn something properly, it's really important to slow the tempo down and get it right. That applies to really tough, complex pieces, but it also applies to simple pieces as well. So for example, if you're playing a piece of music and you're stopping between the chord changes like this, it's because you haven't played it at a slow enough tempo where your fingers can cope with the changes. And when you're learning, especially for beginners, getting that sense of rhythm and timing and smooth changes is way, way more important than playing at tempo. So start at a very slow tempo and increase it a little bit each day, and you'll have that lovely, smooth, gradual improvement. I'm really lucky in that I've had some conversations with some of the best ukulele players on the planet, and that's exactly what they do. When they do those complex techniques, something like that, they will actually spend a lot of time taking each of those notes and taking them one at a time and working on them one step at a time and then gradually increasing the tempo. That's how you're able to achieve really, really great stuff, but gradually learning a little bit at a time. Now, you might be pleased to know we've made it to my very last basic tip, and that is to listen. Listen to music. It's so important. Not only is it good for your soul, which is fantastic, but it teaches us so much. If you're going to play a particular piece of repertoire, say a fingerstyle piece, listen to a version of that piece. Hear the notes, think about the dynamics and the timbre that's being used. Really absorb it. It makes it so much easier to play it. If you're playing a melody, even if you're just strumming and singing, it's really important that you understand that melody and you internalise it. And I think if you can get to a point where you can hum a tune off by heart, that means you've really understood it. Now, this doesn't just apply to pieces of repertoire that you're learning. Listening to any music daily is a really great way to give yourself a subliminal ukulele lesson. Every time you listen to any piece of music, you're learning about rhythm and groove, chord structures, dynamics, timbre, genre, all these amazing things just because you're listening to music and absorbing it. Quite often people get jealous of other musicians that are able to listen to a piece of music and replicate the chords, just play it off by heart. And it's not some amazing special talent that they have. It's just because they've listened to music so often that they've absorbed it and they know what chord changes are likely to come up. And you can do that too. Listen, listen, listen. It's a really key skill and it's an amazing, joyful, soulful thing to do, right? So listen to music every day if you can. Now let's talk about adding structure into your practicing, and this is really important, both in terms of structuring your practice across a week, for example, but also adding structure into each individual practice session. What I've done in the sheets is I've given you some example structures of how you can structure your learning across a week, for example. So the example I've given is for people who have approximately 4 times a week that they can practice, and I've divided it up. Now everyone learns differently and has differing available amounts of time, so you don't have to be totally religious about this, but it gives you some idea of how you can structure your learning, and it gives you some ideas about how to do that as well. The first thing you might notice in the example that I've given is that I vary what you do with each session. And I think that's really important. I think the old days of kind of like we would have had at school, where you had one set thing to do and you had to do it again and again and again each time. I think that's a bit of an old-fashioned way of learning, and personally speaking, I think that can be quite discouraging and it doesn't kind of give you any enthusiasm for practice. And I think it's really important to involve all those other key practice skills that I mentioned. So things like listening and also absorbing a little bit of theory work. So you'll notice that I've broken down the sessions with different types of learning at each of those 4 lessons. Variety is the spice of life, right? So we want to bring that into our learning, and it helps to keep us interested and engaged. So you might notice in the example that I've given is quite interesting, and you might think it's a bit maverick, but the first practice lesson of our week, we have no ukulele playing necessarily. We have a theory or listening session. So what we could do, for instance, if you were playing a piece of music and it involved diminished chords, what you could do is you could take one of the lessons from my uke theory course and learn all about diminished chords. Or perhaps you could do a bit of Googling yourself or watch some YouTube videos on diminished chords. See if you can learn how they are created, why they exist. That will really help you then when you come to your repertoire, because understanding how and why something works makes it much more enjoyable, and it boosts your knowledge as well. So for instance, your first session could be a theory session. Take one of my theory lessons, learn a new piece of theory. That's a really good thing to do. Another thing you could do is use this session as a listening session. So have a listen to the piece of repertoire that you're trying to learn. So for example, be that Octopus's Garden, you could listen to the Beatles version. If you're on my jazz and blues course and you're doing It Don't Mean a Thing If It Ain't Got That Swing, you could listen to the Ella Fitzgerald version, and you could even do a bit of research and listen to other versions of the same song. A really positive thing to do and a really enjoyable session. But of course, as I mentioned earlier, when you listen to music, you're still learning all the time. So not every single one of these sessions has to be a playing ukulele session. You're still learning if you're listening or absorbing theory. The next session we do get more specific. So this one's a study or repertoire session. What do I mean by that? Well, we just study or learn something specific in terms of learning a piece of repertoire, so a piece of music or a pop song, or it could be we're studying a particular skill, or it could be that you're working through one of my video lessons on one of the courses. You'll notice in the workshops that even for this session, I've broken it down. Again, variety is so important in terms of keeping you engaged. So rather than just doing the same thing all the way through, for example, for an hour, which can be a little bit discouraging and tiring, I've broken it down into various sections. So first of all, we have a 5-minute warm-up. That could be anything as simple as limbering up your fingers. There are various ways we can do that to get the blood flowing, shaking them out. It could be warming up by playing notes along your fretboard and practicing getting them really neatly. But a warm-up is a really good idea each time we practice. Then perhaps 10 minutes of scale practice, something that's quite boring and would be quite discouraging if you did for a whole hour, but just 10 minutes can really boost your learning and can be quite enjoyable. So you could take a scale, say you're playing a song that's in the key of F, you could learn the F major scale, and you can find this in my reference book, or you can Google it, of course, to find the notes all over the fretboard, and perhaps learn to play that in 2 different places, which is a really great skill to have. Next up, and you might think I'm becoming obsessed with this, but it's really important, 5 minutes of listening. So if you're learning a piece of music, say it's Surfing USA by the Beach Boys, have a listen to their version so you can get an idea for the feel of the piece. And of course you can have a listen to the version within the lesson as well, if you're learning from a book and it has a CD, or if you're learning a piece from one of my courses. Next up, we have the good solid middle part of the lesson, where we have 25 minutes, even half an hour perhaps, of working on a specific piece of repertoire or a key skill. Work through things slowly at your own pace, thinking about slowing down the tempo and then increasing it. And also don't forget to pause to take notes, that's really important. And finally, but really crucially, spend 10 to 15 minutes at the end recording your progress. That could be specifically recording a video of yourself playing, like we talked about earlier. It could be writing notes of what you found difficult or what you need to work on next, or perhaps some questions for your teacher, which will be really important. This means that next time when you settle down for your next lesson or practice session, you've got the tools that you need to get going and you're already on the on-ramp. So if you're learning 4 times a week, which for me that would be my ideal amount of practice for all of my students, we've got 2 of these study repertoire sessions where we're really working on a piece of music that myself or yourself or somebody else has set for you. Notice there is one other session which I've sandwiched in the middle, which I think is really important, and that's a session where you just specifically work on a specific technique. This one again is really important. Say you're working on a piece of music and it features some Hawaiian triplets. And each time you do them when you're practicing your study or repertoire, they're not quite right, they don't sound really smooth. Well, this is your chance just to practice that one specific technique. If you just leave it to when you have your study and repertoire and you're not quite there with it, you'll find that each time you come to the measures with that specific technique in, it will build up anxiety in you. And the last thing that we want when we're playing ukulele or any instrument is a build-up of anxiety. So if you practice that technique in isolation, when you come to put it into the song, you'll be so much more confident with it. So for example, if it was that Hawaiian triplet that I was trying to learn, I would spend a single session just practicing that technique. You might watch a video of myself teaching it, or you might just practice it because you already know it and you just need to tighten it up. And you would work on it really slowly. So for instance, for that Hawaiian triplet, I wouldn't put any chords on it. I would just practice the technique in isolation first. And I would do it incredibly slowly. Up, triple it, down, up, triple it, down. And I would spend a good 10 minutes perhaps of just doing that, really thinking about my technique and perfecting it. Then I would gradually speed it up, triple it, down, up, triple it, down, up, triple it, down, up, triple it, down. Again, spend a good sort of 10 minutes on that, really gradually increasing the tempo. And then when I feel ready, perhaps I would then introduce the chords. And that technique session could be anything. It could be hammer-ons, slides. There's all sorts of things. It could even be practicing just changing between 2 chords and getting them as smooth as possible. But by practicing things in isolation, when we introduce them into a song or a piece of repertoire, they become much more easy to do, therefore much more enjoyable. So get that structure into your learning, add all that variety in. Practicing can be loads of fun. It doesn't have to be working on the same boring scale or the same piece of music again and again and again at the same tempo. Vary things up and have fun. So just some final thoughts then on your practicing. First of all, try not to compare yourself to other students or other players. Everyone learns at different rates. We've got different ages, different skill sets, different physiques. All sorts of things affect your learning. So don't compare yourselves to others. It's really great to share and build that sense of community. So if you're on Facebook, for instance, you could post videos on our Uke Students Hangout where we all encourage each other with our videos. So sharing is really, really important, and asking for help and advice is great too. But don't compare yourself to others. Don't be discouraged. Everyone learns at their own rate. Likewise, find what works for you in terms of your practice regime. You don't have to follow my structured learning ideas line by line. The important thing is the key concepts of adding variety and listening as well. But some people prefer to learn in short bursts, so you might have many 15, 20-minute sessions throughout the week. Other people find that they prefer to sit down once a week with no distractions at all and have a really, really long session. Everybody learns differently, so find what works for you and stick to it. On the sheets I mentioned, practice makes perfect. I kind of think of it as practice makes you better. So perfection is a really hard thing to strive towards, right? But regular practice is really, really crucial. And as someone who's taught so many students one-to-one and elsewhere over the years, I will say that you'll notice a massive difference in your learning if you do practice regularly versus not practicing at all. So do it as and when you can, but try and get those regular practice sessions in. It will really help your learning. Last but not least, don't put yourself under pressure. It's really important. Enjoy your practice and do as much as you can, but don't practice to the point of anxiety. Particularly if you're finding a piece really, really difficult and you're finding specific measures really tough, sometimes it's really important to take a break from something and come back to it later when you're a bit more refreshed. Don't keep doing the same thing over and over and failing and building up anxiety, because I really want you to enjoy your learning journey. It's really important. This is such a joyous instrument. I want you to enjoy each of those practice sessions. If you're finding a build-up of anxiety because you're becoming really frustrated with a particular piece, of course slow it down first, but if it's not really happening, take a break, come back to it later. Enjoy your learning, don't get anxious, and you're not playing the Albert Hall tomorrow. If you are in fact playing the Albert Hall tomorrow, what are you doing watching my videos? Go and practice, you silly fool, and I'll have a seat in a royal box, please. Well, I really hope you found that useful, folks. I know it's a bit of a dry video. You'll notice that I very rarely record videos of me just sat down and talking, because I'm sure that's the easiest way to send you to sleep. But I think this was really important to give you some structure and some guidance in your learning, and I really hope you found it useful. I'll see you in the next normal video very soon, guys. Take care, everyone, and you con.